exposure to Bitcoin on their network. And what they don't realize is that's going to really crush a lot of the demand for the native token as well, which is exactly what happened with Omni, where their token, they made it so you could use Bitcoin instead of the Omni token to pay fees, and the token died. But the network survived for a while. So yeah, I think we're going to see, Bitcoin going to these other layers, and what is and isn't a side chain is going to blur. There's already enough contentious debate about, what's a side chain. Some people think Liquid isn't even a true side chain. Some people think it is. And, we can look at Ethereum as, is it turning into a Bitcoin side chain? Is Coinbase a Bitcoin side chain? Like there's kind of semantic debates of this, but I think what we're going to see is lots of ways for people to use Bitcoin with a wide variety of different features and different trade-offs and different, threats and security models. And some applications will fit better on some things than others. Very centralized things might be fine for having Tron. Having pure decentralization, you might, have to use something like Lightning for that's really your only option. And if you're willing to take some of these other trade-offs, these other chains might work, well and be best suited. And it's all in the end good for Bitcoin, the token, regardless of what happens on Bitcoin, the network.
Sure. Yeah. Ruben, in that same vein, you mentioned sort of how you view all of these layer 2 protocols, Bitcoin layer 2 protocols, as sort of in different ways cooperating with each other. And I'm curious if your opinion on that extends to these, like what we were just chatting about, these other blockchains sort of blurring the line between what is a sidechain and what isn't, what, like in terms of extending the use cases of Bitcoin. Are they also joining this sort of cooperative push to extend Bitcoin's use cases, or what's your view on their position in all of this?
Yeah, just a very quick check, but can you still hear me? Because I'm having some technical issues, but I think it's all fine. Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Great. So yeah, there are basically two ways to get a token onto another chain. Very broadly speaking, one of them is through some kind of multi-sig federation. And I think with the multi-sig federation, the truth is that the asset is actually contained within the multi-sig of the federation itself, and not so much the actual blockchain it's represented on. The representation is an IOU. So take Liquid, for instance. It's very tightly coupled in the sense that if you do a peg out on the Liquid network, the federation will actually, perform that peg out. But at the end of the day, that is kind of a choice of the federation members to actually take the multisig they have on the Bitcoin blockchain and give you those coins. So you can do the same thing on Ethereum or any other blockchain where you just put some Bitcoins in a multisig and then issue some kind of token on some other platform. And so the other platform is not really where the token is. And then the second type of asset, which we've seen is something like TBTC, which is a derivative asset. So it is not an actual Bitcoin. It is some kind of token that is backed by collateral, and the collateral can be Ether or it can be a USDT or any kind of asset. And it's the collateral that kind of virtually generates the Bitcoin. And there is a coupling to Bitcoin in the sense that the choice is either the user gets the collateral or the user gets a Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then there's some kind of proof on the Bitcoin blockchain, from the Bitcoin blockchain sent to the Ethereum chain that transaction actually occurred. But at the end of the day, that is an optional choice, and the collateral is always kind of what's deciding. So if the collateral is not enough and the price of the collateral goes down too much, you're not going to get your Bitcoin. So this kind of system can, in theory, create an infinite number of Bitcoins, and it's very similar to, futures trading on exchanges. And so again, it's a derivative. It's not really the asset itself. So from that perspective, I don't think it is exactly the same as having Bitcoins, but there's definitely a lot of interoperability, and that is, of course, useful.
Sure. You sort of assume, though, that if these layer 2, I'm using that term broadly now to include all of the protocols we've mentioned, these sort of broadly layer 2 protocols, if any of them started to sort of artificially inflate the supply of Bitcoin, in the way you just mentioned is sort of the IOU format, you sort of assume that their users would sort of abandon it or at least lose trust in it, correct? Or do you think there's a market where people would still use that type of pseudo layer 2 protocol?
Well, one of the questions is whether you can actually verify that the inflation is occurring or not. And I think there are definitely good methods to ensure that that's not the case. For if you have some kind of multi-sig federation, you can actually provably kind of point to the coins on the Bitcoin blockchain and say, like, look, this is what we are representing on this other chain. So I think there's some good, very similar to kind of exchanges being not being fractional. You can definitely tie it to that, but I think I can totally see a future where maybe there's some kind of a federated sidechain where the federation actually goes out and states, no, we're not like one-on-one just holding your coins. We're actually going to open Lightning channels with them and make some kind of revenue out of that. And maybe, the users of that sidechain get like a percentage of whatever it is that they're doing. So you can have all kinds of models. I don't, maybe Bitcoiners don't like that, and they're not going to go with the somewhat more fractional kind of sidechain system. But I think all of those models will eventually occur, and we'll see what's popular and what's not popular, and whether or not the risks are worth it. That's up to everybody else to decide. And then, finally, the derivatives, they are inherently uncoupled from Bitcoin, the asset itself. You can have more derivative assets than there are actual Bitcoins in theory.
Yeah. Interesting. Alex, as sort of wrapping up, I want to pivot a little bit to sort of industry use of these layer 2 protocols, but I have one quick question for starting with you, for all three of you. In, like, let's say 5 years, or maybe even 10 years if you want a little bit of a longer time frame, what percentage of the real Bitcoin supply do you expect to sort of permanently or semi-permanently live on Liquid, Lightning, even like it be tokenized or wrapped and used on Ethereum and Tron and any other blockchains? A majority, still a minority? What's your thoughts, prediction?
Well, I think it would be a minority, but I think it could be a very healthy minority. Like, I've seen estimates that say maybe 50% of Bitcoins right now live on exchanges. So if you consider that a federation just more like a kind of like a security layer on top of exchanges, then you could say that this is just like how much more secure will this already custodial coins be in the future. So I would say like if I had to throw a number out there, an optimistic number, I would say maybe half of all exchange coins will be kind of upgraded in their security, whether it's to Lightning channels or to side chains, that kind of thing.
Allen, really quick, what if you had to guess 5-10 years, what percentage of Bitcoin supply would live on these sort of layer 2? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry about that. I muted myself and forgot. And,
sorry.
There you go. There. Yeah, no, Alex. So 50% of the exchange is what Alex said. So that's interesting. I think you might be a little bit lower than that, but only because a lot of the coins in an exchange are also deeply cold storage. So whenever you have these kind of sidechain coins or Lightning channels, it is a little bit hotter and a little bit more of a risk, even if you have a multi-sig. So maybe 25 to 30% of the exchange coins would be a good amount, the ones that are actively being moved. I think it also kind of comes into play of where we're at with Bitcoin. Is it still being held as a buy and hold asset, or have we reached a phase where Bitcoin's appreciated enough where those returns are unrealistic in the future, and more people are just using it as part of day-to-day commerce? I think as we see that change, so you're asking me to predict where the price of Bitcoin will be in 5 to 10 years, which is a challenge. But let's just say it is an optimistic case, and Bitcoin has become the world reserve currency in 10 years. I'd expect a pretty good chunk of it to be actively being used and traded for commerce. So probably sidechains will have a good amount, and maybe you have another eighth to a quarter of it just being actively being used all the time on channels.
Interesting. Ruben, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think I have any good predictions here. I don't know what's already said. I would just say, very generally speaking, that once there is more and more demand of block space and fees go up, people are kind of forced to make trade-offs in order to still utilize their coins, assuming they don't just want to hold. And that's definitely true as well. Like, it could easily be like a very long time before Bitcoin is really used as money. But in that kind of scenario, I think you end up with this choice of putting trust in some kind of federation and then being able to transact more cheaply, or not wanting to do that. And I do think at that point, the choice kind of becomes more enticing to start trusting these other systems that have this kind of multi-sig federation type of security. And obviously, the Lightning Network is also a good choice for that. So I think it really depends a lot on demand, where the market is going to go, how much block space is going to be used, how expensive it's going to be, and I don't think it makes sense even to make a prediction.
Fair enough. I was hoping to get a number out of you, but the answer is also
no number from me. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So we have about 5 minutes left here and way too much to talk about. Allen, I really wanted to talk about NFTs on Liquid, but I want to hop over to a couple industry questions really quick, specifically exchanges. Some exchanges are pretty proactive in integrating Bitcoin layer 2 tech like Lightning and Liquid. Bitfinex obviously is a leader or the leader in the industry in that regard. But others not so much, and plenty of users on Twitter and other social platforms regularly ask for these layer 2 tech to be integrated. So my question to all of you is, how do we and them sort of get these larger players to take layer 2 more seriously than some of them seem to be taking it and accelerate these integrations? Or should they take it more seriously? Should exchanges opt to consider integrating any layer 2 solution by default or be more choosy? How do they decide what to integrate? All of that. Alex, want to start with you and then just sort of go across Ruben and then Allen?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is that if it's more efficient, if it's a better solution, then you just would want it more as a consumer. Like, do you want an exchange where it costs you a lot of money to withdraw and it costs you, it takes a long time to deposit, or do you want an exchange where it's free to withdraw and then you can deposit instantly? So like, one thing is just use these services more and use the services that are delivering a better solution. Use those more. The other thing I would say is I do think it should be done, cautiously. Like, Lightning is a huge project, right? Like, even in Bitcoin, after 10 years, we're still like discovering new problems with it. It's probably a simpler protocol than Lightning is. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the protocol side, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the integration side. That people have to kind of like deploy this and try it out and figure out what are the best practices. So one way that people can help to move things forward is like be a participant in the open source community, be a participant just in the like nascent economy. If they want to see that happen, I wouldn't just like create support tickets to say like when Lightning. I would actually help build it out and help make that ecosystem more robust.
Ruben, if an exchange came to you and sort of said, tell us what we need to know about layer 2 and what we should integrate, what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, so I think so very similar to what Alex was saying. I think at the end of the day, we have this Bitcoin protocol that is there's not a single owner, right? We all are responsible for what the protocol is going to be. So I think these companies have some kind of responsibility to give something back and contribute to the open source community and maybe hire some developers or something like that. And I think that's kind of a separate question from whether or not they should integrate layer 2. They can integrate layer 2 as part of that, as part of giving back and doing something that's experimental that they don't necessarily need right now. But I think the actual integration at the end of the day has to come from a real need, right? Where it makes business sense for them to integrate it because fees are getting higher and higher. And I think that's when we're going to see more federations, more users flocking to Lightning once we see these on-chain fees going up and things getting expensive. And I think that's only then will we really see a motivation to work on these things and integrate them. And before then, they should already just be contributing to open source in general, but not necessarily to layer 2 integration. That could be one of the things they can do, but there are many ways in which you can contribute back to Bitcoin.
Sure. Allen, what are your thoughts on exchanges and layer 2?
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to come down to a business case, and it's going to be a couple cases of how ahead of the curve do you want to be. And adoption curves are always going to have people that are, on the forefront and will do it way before it makes sense. But they do that because they want to get that expertise so that when it does make sense, they are the leaders in this. So we're going to always see people that are the innovators and the leaders. We've seen which exchanges have been the first ones to get involved in layer 2 solutions. You're always going to have the ones that kind of wait and follow the pack and they'll join on. And then you're going to have the laggards that will wait until everything's completely broken and falling apart before they switch over. So I think that's a big part of it. And also with exchanges, I think it's also important to consider they have a lot of other issues besides Bitcoin. So a lot of exchanges I've seen getting bad raps for, not managing their wallets properly or things like that. But they're also having to deal with scaling up trading engines to scales that really just aren't, ever done before. They're having to onboard, millions of users sometimes in very short periods of time during these bull markets. And so they're going to focus on things that are very clearly, if you can onboard 1,000 new customers by upgrading your support system, that's a lot better than maybe saving a few bucks on fees. So I understand why they're doing that. And I think the other part is too, we're seeing a shift from just pure exchanges that are basically exist to collect trading fees, where people are flipping between different assets and they don't even care about pulling the coins off the exchange because it's just really just a gambling thing for them. It's a day trading activity, and they're just playing around. And then you have Bitcoin focused companies that are really popping up now that only support Bitcoin. And for those companies, it makes a lot more sense to support Lightning and Liquid and layer 2 solutions, just simply because, if you have a solution that only works for Bitcoin and you have, 500 assets, maybe it's not that important to you. But if you have only Bitcoin and Bitcoin is your baby, you're going to, it's your bread and butter for how you're going to run your business. You have to be on the forefront of it and you have to be ready. So I think that's where we're going to see the earliest adoption. And again, I think some of these new companies that are Bitcoin focused have done a really good job of jumping on layer 2 where it makes sense. And that's probably where we'll see it first.
Sure.
And we'll have to wait for the separation between the casino and the Bitcoin services businesses play out.
Sure. That makes sense. And thank you all for your time. I have one quick question, rapid fire round for all of you I want to sort of end with before we go. I realize we're just about a minute over time here, but before we leave, I wanted to get a soundbite from each of you on what the biggest misunderstanding currently is about Liquid, Lightning, and state chains that you wish could be corrected immediately if we lived in a perfect layer 2 world. Allen, start with you for Liquid, and then Ruben, state chains, and Alex, Lightning.
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is what the Federation has the power and doesn't have the power to do. So we touched about the security of Bitcoin, but really, assets, what do they have the power to control or censor or even roll back? And I think there's a lot less power, and especially by design of Liquid, that the Federation actually has than people realize. It's not quite as powerful as people think in terms of control or being able to stop things.
Ruben, what about state chains?
The biggest misconception, I guess the degree to which you have to trust the Federation in state chains. I think that's if I had to explain kind of what state chains are in in a short soundbite, I would say it's kind of like a federated sidechain, but instead of transferring any amount you want, you're restricted to sending UTXOs. And the reason you're restricted to that, you get something back, and that's a minimal amount of trust in the Federation, where the Federation doesn't know what it's signing through blind signatures. You have an off-chain transaction where if the Federation disappears, you can always claim your coins back, and that kind of fundamentally increases the security model over a regular federated sidechain, but at a cost, right? Because it's kind of more cumbersome.
Sure, thanks. Alex, what about Lightning? What's the biggest misconception now?
I think the biggest misconception is that the Lightning doesn't really need to think about the liquidity question. So people say, oh, well, Lightning is free and it's instant and it's totally private. But those are all metrics that are subject to how much liquidity is available. And so sometimes Lightning will cost you money, and sometimes Lightning won't be perfectly private. And sometimes it will take a while to actually execute a payment. And all of those things are relative to how much money you're actually transacting across the network. So I think people need to have that in their mind when they're using Lightning, that it's most efficient when used with smaller amounts. And then at larger amounts, you start to have trade-offs.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for your time and opinions and thoughts. This was a lot of fun for me, and I hope fun for the audience too, who we can't really see right now. But thanks, and cheers, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. See you guys.
Okay.